everyone, welcome to the NowThis studio on election night. It's now just after 9 p.m. on the East Coast. We've got some big news out of Florida. Florida's Amendment 4 has passed, and that is re-enfranchising, I think, about 1.5 million people, former felons who had lost the right to vote. But they'll now have it. So we've got a great panel here tonight. We'll discuss a little bit more about that initiative in just a minute. I also want to run through some of the historic firsts that we're already seeing. Ayanna Pressley has won her election to Congress, and she becomes the first Black Congresswoman to represent the state of Massachusetts. And in 229 years, Congress has never had a Muslim woman representative until now. Michigan has elected Rashida Tlaib to Congress. She also becomes the first ever Palestinian American member of Congress. If you're just tuning in, I'm Varsha Sharma from NowThis, joined by a panel of great guests to talk us through the latest results. It is after 9 p.m. now, a lot of polls have closed and the anxiety levels are getting pretty high. So joining me now is Judd Legum. He's the founder of Popular Information, Carolyn Fiddler, the communication director at Daily Kos, and David Rothschild, pollster and founder of PredictWise. David, I want to go to you. We've had some interesting movement in the last hour that I think we need to update people on in terms of our whiteboard.
Yeah, so let's take a look here. So amazingly, things have changed, but they stay the same in some ways, because we came out here with 208 Democratic seats looking lean or better, and about 194 Republican seats looking lean or better, and everything is breaking in those directions. So whereas the last hour there was this number had popped up to almost 85% for the Democrats simply because it looked like some of these seats were going to start to lean Republican, were starting to move Democratic. They did not. We are back into a state in which it is all about the toss-ups. These toss-ups are tight. We are seeing incredibly tight races, some of them going Democratic, some of them going Republican. But of these 33 toss-ups, the Democrats need to pick out 10 in order to capture the House, which is why they are still slightly favored. Only slightly because there's a lot of similarities in these districts, and it is possible that the Republicans could run that table. And so that's something we're going to be keeping a very tight eye on. We got a little bit more movement here. Again, we had 4 seats that were a toss-up in the Senate. Florida is now looking very good for the Republicans, and so we moved that over there. But kind of in the counting column now, New Jersey and West Virginia are now actually in the bag there. So that goes up to 44, and it looks like Indiana, which was leaning hard there, is definitely in the bag for the Republicans. That brings them up to 47. And that still keeps the kind of vote totals here. We got 46 on this side with Montana and Nevada still slightly leaning Democratic, with Mississippi, North Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Florida still looking good for the Republicans. That brings them up to 52 with 2 races, which we don't have enough information yet to really put into a column of likelies. And here we had pretty much where we started on the governor's races. Illinois and New Mexico still looking very strong for pickups, and I think they may have called the Illinois race. Ohio is still leaning pretty heavily to the Democrats. It looked even better. It's now down. And Florida, which looked like a good opportunity, is now back into that possible category as things have shifted there in Florida.
Yeah, so it seemed like early on, Gillum had a strong lead, and then of course as more results came in, it narrowed. We were looking at the totals. It was, what, 80,000 votes, within 80,000 votes right now?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think if you look at the picture overall, I think, as David was saying, the House remains in play. The Democrats may pick up the House. They may not, but they may. And if so, that would be a big deal. The House control doesn't change that often. And as we discussed on some earlier segments, there'd be real practical impacts to the Democrats controlling a chamber of the House. But I think the other thing you have to look at is, if we were expecting a rising up and a decisive blow against Trump and the kind of campaign that he has run, his rhetoric, I don't know if that's going to be the message that's being sent. I think a lot of the seats that we thought were competitive remain competitive. We're not seeing a massive change in the electorate and in voting patterns that reflects that yet. And I think that's the reality of what we're seeing as the election night plays out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about Florida's Amendment 4, though, because I think this is really exciting. A lot of people are saying this is the biggest expansion of voting rights since the Voting Rights Act happened.
Yeah, it's 1.4, 1.5 million new voters on the rolls potentially in Florida, and that will change the electorate down there significantly.
And do we have the percentages on how much it passed with?
The threshold is at least 60, and right now it got called with somewhere in the neighborhood of 64, 65, with votes still outstanding.
That's pretty significant. That's a lot of support for that initiative.
I mean, it's just small d democratic, just good policy. Yeah. So the messaging, I know the organizations that were pushing this measure were really assiduous about the messaging, and clearly it paid off.
And I know we were talking about the razor-thin margin that Andrew Gillum is now dealing with against Ron DeSantis, and I saw a report that said actually the last 2 governor's races in Florida were decided within 1 point. So that would be within a pattern, but obviously it's just a really tight race that we're monitoring, and that a lot of people are monitoring. So David, what else are we looking forward to now that we're past the 9 p.m. hour?
Well, I think your point is the key thing here. So we've pretty much knocked the blue wave off. That's not happening. There is no blue wave tonight. We're looking at, still some good pickups for the Democrats in the governor's races, but not a landslide because there's some tightness in Florida and Ohio and some states that they'd hope to pick up. So they're going to still pick up 6, 7, maybe even 8 seats, but that's not going to really be a shocking pickup. In the Senate races, at this point, they're going to be lucky to hold on to 54-46, or maybe even slightly worse if that's the case. Then 2020 is really out of the picture for the Democrats, which is a really big blow for them. Because even if they do win the presidency in 2020, they're going to have a really tough time winning back the Senate. And in the House, look, in the House, it really is a binary thing. Having 218 votes versus 217 votes means you control the committees. It means there's oversight of the Trump administration. All the things you mentioned in the earlier hours, from Puerto Rico death tolls to family separation to the Muslim travel ban. The list goes on of things that the Republicans have not investigated and won't investigate if they continue to own the House. And most likely, now we're talking about Mueller, who will be likely dismissed without replacement if the Republicans can hold on to the Senate and hold on to the House.
I think that picking up 8 or 9 governor seats is actually still a huge deal, no matter what happens on the rest of at every other level of the ballot over the course of the night. I mean, places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio that haven't had a Democratic governor in this decade.
Absolutely.
This is going to change the nature of politics in those states dramatically, and picking up 8 or 9 governorships in a night is a pretty good win for Democrats.
I don't want to dismiss that, and you're entirely right. I guess I was thinking more about the tone that will come out of the evening. It's going to be one in which Donald Trump will feel vindication. At this point, it's hard to imagine a scenario where he doesn't say that, think at least that his pivot towards immigration, towards xenophobia and racism as a final message was not successful. A push towards voter suppression in Georgia, which appears to be successful. These are things that they are going to carry with them in their 2020 strategy.
Which is why Democrats winning at the state level, not just the governorships, but secretaries of state, attorneys general races, and legislatures is going to be a big deal. And we're already seeing some flips for Democrats trickle in on the state legislative level tonight. A few in the Florida House, one in the Massachusetts House, and a few in the New Hampshire House have already been called.
And you were saying right before this that Florida elected their first ever Iranian-American representative?
To their state house, yes.
Yes, so that's another first. This is not a first, but it's another race that I want to call out. You guys remember Kim Davis, right? She made a huge deal out of not issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples in Kentucky. Well, she has lost her re-election bid. She will no longer be a county clerk and no longer denying marriage licenses to same-sex couples.
That is a delicious win for progressives.
It is, exactly. So I think that, that's just sort of important perspective to keep in mind is if we're not seeing a major blue wave, if we're not seeing the decisive rejection of Trumpism that a lot of progressives were hoping for, there are a lot of interesting local and state races that matter, that make huge differences in people's lives.
And I think it actually speaks to the fundamental nature of politics, which is that things don't change overnight.
Yes.
A lot of times things change very slowly, and especially with the advantages of incumbency and the advantages when one party does have control over most political power, and how that can play out in terms of drawing the districts, in terms of controlling the way people vote, but just in terms of having that power and being able to execute it, being the president and being able to drive this message of this migrant caravan that was threatening the United States border, even though it's 1,000 miles away in Mexico. It may never get to the border. That is powerful, and overcoming that is actually a longer term process. It wasn't necessarily so that was going to be the case, but I think that's what the night is unveiling. But as David said, as we've all said, if the Democrats take the House, I think it's still a big historic night for them that changes the complexion of the next 2 years in a very dramatic way. So I think the true story of the night is yet to be written, because it's going to come down to can they retain control. Maybe they won't have a huge majority, but a majority is a majority.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, look, as we talked about earlier this evening as well, look, the Democrats are going to get more votes. They had more votes for the presidency. They're going to have more votes for the House. They're going to have more votes for the Senate.
Yeah.
And there's a chance they may control none of them. There's a chance they may control just the House. Controlling the House makes all the difference as far as the ability to provide oversight and the ability to provide test legislation, which creates a really sharp contrast between them and the Republicans as you move into 2020, to block legislation, things the Republicans want to do. They've talked about it. Further attack on Obamacare, of course. They've already put forward another tax plan. This one is not quite as regressive, but we're still looking at something in which the vast majority of the money will go to people who have incomes from about $350,000 to $1 million versus the vast majority of the money going to people with incomes of $1 million plus. But these are things that they'll push through if they take the House. These are things that will not be non-starters if the Democrats control the House, and it is the difference between 218 and 217. So it's going to be a late night, too. We should also mention that as well. For those of you tuning in right now, West Coast, you have a nice advantage because we're definitely not going to know very much before California and probably much later.
Yes, it's going to be a long night. We're going to be here live in the NowThis studio all night, so make sure that you're tuning in. We'll be live here with our guest panel at the top of every hour, but we've also got a ton of reporters in the field, and I believe right after this we may have some live segments coming to you out of Tallahassee and Parkland, Florida. So make sure you stay tuned to this page, and we'll be back at 10 p.m. Eastern. Thank you guys for watching.